Welcome to Catholic Connection with Theresa Tomeo, keeping you connected to your faith and your world. Theresa tackles the issues of faith and culture, the pro-life message, and media awareness. And now, here's Theresa Tomeo.
Happy Monday. It is July 20th, 2026. Great to be with you on a Monday morning and every day here at EWTN's Catholic Connection, and wishing you a beautiful start of the week and asking for your prayers. Dick and Dominic and I, after the show today, are heading back to the good old US of A, and hopefully things are clearing up there in Michigan. We had some weather that hopefully changed it a bit, but it's still not 100% with the fog and the smoke and all that stuff. And of course, we've had a heat wave in Michigan as well, but that's been happening all over the country. Looking forward to seeing family and friends, and also, of course, being with you stateside again, and that will happen live, good Lord willing, tomorrow on a Tuesday. But for today on a Monday, so excited to tell you about some pretty exciting events that are right around the corner, including we are going to be discussing the America's Saint Conference, and we're going to be chatting with Dr. Peter Howard, who will be the MC and the host. And you will not believe it. All these amazing speakers in one place, in St. Louis, in one day, directly tied to the man called America's Saint, of course, and that is Archbishop Fulton Sheen. So what's really cool about this conference is that these speakers are sharing heartfelt stories of what Archbishop Fulton Sheen meant to them and how he impacted their various ministries. So it's a beautiful conference. It's filling up, though. We'll give you the details. And then we are going to share with you an interview with Robert Greving. And he has a beautiful book. He was in studio recently and sat down with us in the second hour of Catholic Connection. And I thought it was such a cool interview because of what he is proclaiming is so simple, but sometimes so overlooked because of its simplicity. And he has a book and a ministry called the Apostolate of Courtesy. So we'll discuss with Robert Greving. And then hour number 2, another event you can attend, but you don't have to travel for this one except to your computer. And this will be with our good friend Dan Burke from the Avila Institute. They are having an unbelievable online summit on spiritual warfare, and it's all about family as well. And that event is later this week, and you can still register. Last but not least, we sit down with Dr. Theresa Farnan. She is amazing. She's a fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center, and we're following up on stories looking at violations of the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act regarding hiding transgenderism from parents. You know, despite the Supreme Court decision recently, despite other state laws that have been passed to protect families and parents, still happening. And the agenda is still very strong. So she gives us an update on that fascinating interview. So that's what's coming up today on a Monday morning, July 20th on Catholic Connection. But of course, we always have to start with your weather on a Monday morning. The National Weather Service is saying Canadian wildfire smoke pushing into the Midwest and worsening air quality. A frontal system is bringing severe storms to the northern plains to the mid-Atlantic over the next few days, and heavy Gulf Coast rain is possible as we continue to monitor different storms that are persisting in the southwest with heavy rainfall. We also have hazardous heat expected from the plains into the lower Mississippi Valley. Now let's take a look at the news on a Monday morning, July 20th, here at EWTN. Pope Leo urging Christians to reject the temptation to seek spectacular displays of God's power, reminding the faithful the kingdom of God grows quietly and patiently, like a tiny seed or a little yeast working unseen. Addressing pilgrims gathered for the Sunday Angelus in Castel Gandolfo, the Pope reflecting on 3 parables from St. Matthew's Gospel, the wheat and the weeds, the mustard seed, and the yeast, which he says reveals the way God acts in history and the lives of men and women. He said, rather than imposing himself by force or arriving in triumph, God chooses smallness as a sign of his discreet and patient love. He said he leaves us to freely accept or reject him, noting that God's love makes its presence felt even among the weeds and works invisibly, such as the smallest of seeds, transforming the world silently, such as yeast in dough. He also said Christians are called to recognize the kingdom grows even amid the presence of evil, requiring us to learn to discern the good that continues to emerge despite darkness, resisting the temptation to make hasty judgments, and patiently accompanying the gradual work of God's grace. And from Vatican News, Nathan Morley tells us a new UNICEF analysis is warning the global economic shock triggered by the conflict in the Mideast could leave more than 23 million additional children at risk of monetary poverty by the end of the year, reversing years of progress and deepening inequality.
In a recent interview, the UNICEF spokesperson James Elder said the ceasefire in Gaza has become a cruel and deadly illusion. Since it was announced in October 2025, over 250 Palestinian children have reportedly been killed across Gaza. That's an average of one child every day, whilst more than 400 others have been injured, many with severe and life-changing wounds. Mr. Elder said that children continue to be killed in places where they should be safe, including homes, schools and shelters, and stressed that the constant exposure to violence has left Gaza's children with a profound psychological trauma, affecting their ability to eat, sleep and develop normally.
These children were not killed in a war zone. They were killed in their homes. They were killed in their schools. They were killed playing football. They were killed fishing. They were shot. They were bombed. They were struck by quadcopters. While the world continues to speak the language of ceasefire, families in Gaza continue to bury their children. However, if a child is being killed every day, surely the debate now is no longer about the quality of this ceasefire. It's about the credibility of calling it one.
Generally, Gaza is battling a multitude of problems. For example, a severe shortage of engine oil, tyres and spare parts are placing life-saving humanitarian operations at risk across the Strip. According to the ICRC, the overall water production in Gaza has dropped radically to around 40% of what it was before October 2023. The situation has deteriorated rapidly in recent months, largely due to shortages of chemicals and spare parts. Today, for over 70% of the population, the primary source of drinking water is truck deliveries sponsored by UNRWA and other partners. For Vatican Radio, this is Nathan Morley reporting.
President Trump wants Iran added to a bipartisan Russian sanctions bill. The measure would impose mandatory sanctions on Russian political and military leaders, as well as oligarchs, state-owned enterprises, and foreign companies that support Russia's defense and industrial base. In a Truth Social post yesterday, Trump called on Republicans to add Iran to the bill, writing that it's what the late Senator Lindsey Graham wanted to do. And the U.S. military says it has completed the 8th straight night of airstrikes against Iran following the deaths of 2 U.S. service members by an Iranian air attack. U.S. Central Command saying in a statement that the strikes were launched over the weekend at President Trump's direction and are aimed at punishing Iranian forces who killed those 2 service members at the military base in Jordan. Meanwhile, Energy Secretary Chris Wright says the U.S. mission against Iran will go on until President Trump's objective is received. Wright speaking on ABC's This Week yesterday, saying Trump's mission is essential for peace in the Middle East and peace in the world as well.
The president is always looking for the diplomatic off-ramp. President Trump wants to end it with a peaceful agreement with Iran, but it takes 2 parties to do that.
Wright was also asked if the president planned to retaliate further in response to the death of 2 American service members after that Iranian attack over the weekend. He responded by saying it's tragic to lose lives, but this is a mission, he said, that will save countless lives going forward. Meanwhile, as Rob Martier reports, President Trump is fuming over heavy smoke from those Canadian wildfires.
President Trump threatened to raise tariffs to cover the cost associated with unhealthy air quality. On social media Friday, Trump said we're holding Canada responsible and that the cost of the pollution must be added to the tariffs that Canada is paying. The president added that Canada was not properly maintaining their forests and brush terrain, and the United States is being unnecessarily invaded by filthy, polluted, and unhealthy air. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney blamed the fires on climate change, which he said is the responsibility of all countries, including the U.S. I'm Rob Martier.
And those clouds of Canadian wildfire smoke are drifting even further into the U.S. Air quality alerts have now been issued from the upper Midwest and New England to as far south as Washington, D.C. Over 900 wildfires are burning across Canada, sending smoke into the Northeast and the Mid-Atlantic and the Midwest as well. Jim Forbes tells us Andrew Tate and his brother have been arrested in Miami.
The social media influencers notorious for their sexist views were arrested by federal marshals on Saturday on criminal charges of rape and sex trafficking in the UK. A news release from the UK's Crown Prosecution Service says 39-year-old Andrew Tate has been charged with 7 counts of rape, 3 counts of sex trafficking, 3 counts of assault, and other offenses. His brother, 38-year-old Tristan Tate, is being charged with 2 counts of rape, sexual assault, and sex trafficking. British authorities are seeking their extradition. I'm Jim Forbes.
5 members of a family have been found dead after a flash flood raced through a Utah campground. A local sheriff said that they were called to the Sunglow campground less than 2 miles from Bicknell after a young man's body was found over the weekend. Search and rescue crews later found the bodies of 2 more men. All 3 were apparently caught up in flash flooding. The bodies of 2 more family members were found on Sunday. And there's a severe storm front headed to the Midwest this week. Forecasters are warning of thunderstorms producing hail, damaging winds, and torrential downpours, starting this afternoon with Wisconsin getting the worst of it. Wind gusts could hit 70 miles per hour, and isolated tornadoes are possible. And tomorrow, that storm front will push into the lower Midwest, including much of Ohio. Those storms could produce lightning strikes capable of sparking wildfires. And they could also, however, clear up those Canadian wildfires that have been blanketing the area with their smoke. Larry Kofsky tells us New York City health officials are saying a second person has now died from Legionnaire's disease in connection with the outbreak on Manhattan's Upper East Side.
The death of the latest victim, whose identity has not been made public, comes even as the city reports a sharp decline in new Legionnaire's cases, from 8 per day at the start of the outbreak to less than 1 per day since July 10th. As of yesterday, there have been 72 confirmed cases. 50 people have been discharged from the hospital. 9 people remain hospitalized. I'm Larry Kofsky.
And Jim Forbes tells us Hyundai is recalling over 47,000 Kona SUVs for a defect with the rear center seatbelt.
The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration says the recall covers nearly 48,000 vehicles, including certain 2025 Hyundai Kona Electric and 2026 Hyundai Kona models. The automaker said the rear center seatbelt buckle may fail to properly restrain a passenger during a crash. Hyundai is advising owners not to use the rear center seating position until it's repaired. Owner notification letters are expected to be mailed September 11th. And dealers will replace the rear center seat buckle assembly free of charge. I'm Jim Forbes.
And new information shows the World Cup raised consumer spending around the U.S. last month. The Bank of America Institute found that consumer spending using credit and debit cards increased over 6% from a year ago. That's the biggest jump in over 4 years. The information shows higher consumer spending, mainly at restaurants and bars. It also found many lower-income households increase their spending at local businesses in host cities. That's a look at the news on a Monday morning, July 20th. Catholic Connection continues right after these messages. Wait till you get a load of the speakers at this conference. When I say just jam-packed with amazing speakers, many of whom are familiar to our EWTN viewers and listeners, it's incredible. Talking to us right now is Dr. Peter Howard. He's the founder and president of the Fulton Sheen movement, and we're talking to him today about the America's Saint Conference, a one-day event on the eve of the great Fulton Sheen's beatification. And Dr. Peter Howard, thank you so much for joining us. This is very exciting. Good morning.
Good morning, Theresa. Yeah, this is extremely exciting, and I really hope that we can get everyone there that wants to go.
It's not that far away. I mean, I know we're still in July, but this is coming up toward the end of September. It's Wednesday, September 23rd in St. Louis. Tell us about it.
Sure. Well, it's September 23rd. It's the eve, so it's all day before the actual beatification Mass on September 24th. And as you mentioned, we have an incredible lineup for this conference. It's called America's Saint because he's the one saint that everyone, I think, in this country can relate to most. And as Fulton Sheen put it himself, he says, we need an American saint, one who was born here, raised to what everybody would consider sort of like Americana. You know, you're born on the farms, you're
right.
Working the fields, Catholic schools, and all of that. So this is a conference that is put together to bring everybody to the very heart of why Fulton Sheen is being beatified and why he's being beatified right now at this critical moment in our nation's history, and I would say the history of the church. So we have, it's all day, 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. All the information on this conference can be found at fultonsheenconference.com. People can register right there. We even have space available for people at the Hilton where it's being held in Frontenac, just outside of the city center in St. Louis. And yes, we have an extraordinary lineup of speakers that cover, I would say, very different angles of why Sheen's so important because of the impact on their lives. Not just they like Sheen, they watched him on TV. Their lives have been deeply touched, just as mine was. My entire life was changed once I got introduced to Fulton Sheen 30 years ago. So we wanted people who could share similar stories to inspire people of why he's so needed right now.
Well, let me just go over this list. In addition to yourself serving as the MC and the host of this beautiful conference, you have our very own Monsignor Roger Landry, who's just a staple here at EWTN, Catholic priest and commentator. Jason Jones is an amazing filmmaker and author. He's been a guest on this program. All these folks have been guests on my show, and I know them all. Dale Ahlquist, the Society of G.K. Chesterton. Sister Dee Dee, oh my gosh, she's one of my favorites. Sister Dee Dee Burns, she's off the charts. Sherry Ballinger, Father Thomas Loya, he has a radio show all about Light of the East. John Yep, Catholics for Catholics. This is incredible. Father Jason Sharon. I mean, on and on and on. And you're even going to announce more speakers. Now, here's the thing. It's one day, so it's only one day to talk about Fulton Sheen. You probably need a whole month at least. But you mentioned most of them are going to be giving testimonies. Will they be concentrating, Doctor, on different aspects of Fulton Sheen's ministry, or mainly just sharing their own story, as you mentioned earlier, and how he impacted their lives?
Well, I think it's a little bit of both, because it's what about Sheen's mission that touched them, because pretty much everybody on this list is working for souls. I'd say actually all of them are. And so there's something that inspired him about the Sheen's very purpose of why he was given to the church. And they're continuing that in some way, like Jason Jones, Vulnerable People Project. He's in the media. He captures a dimension of Sheen that isn't really talked about that much at all. Especially, what would Sheen say about all these things that are happening against the vulnerable, whether it be in Africa and the Middle East? And so he's a voice of that. I see him as one of the great champions of Sheen in that respect. We have Father Thomas Loya, Father Jason Sharon, who you mentioned. They represent a side of Sheen that hardly is ever talked about. Sheen was bi-ritual. He was he was Byzantine and Roman. How do we understand both? You could say both lungs of Fulton Sheen, of the East and the West, because Sheen he was the first bishop or priest, really, at the same time, to say the Divine Liturgy in English. Many people don't know that. So he is a truly Catholic figure, and everyone here, even Dale Ahlquist, G.K. Chesterton. Fulton Sheen was known as the American Chesterton. Why is that? What wisdom did they share? How was one the extension of the other? So it's extremely powerful to see how these things are coming out. Like at Tammy Peterson, she's had a very deep personal connection with Fulton Sheen during her conversion to the Catholic faith. So this is why I think it's going to be so important and so powerful, because it really does touch the hearts of those who are going to be there to be inspired. This is not tell me about Fulton Sheen. There's going to be millions of those things, and you can find them online. This is the encountering the living Sheen now. And that's why I think this conference stands apart from so many other things.
Absolutely. The website is fultonsheenconference.com. Again, fultonsheenconference.com. We're talking with Dr. Peter Howard, founder of the Fulton Sheen Institute and Fulton Sheen Movement. So take us back when you were first exposed to the great Fulton Sheen, Peter.
It felt like chance. I went on a personal retreat. This was almost 30 years ago, and I was in Texas discerning my life, and my sister handed me cassette tapes and said, "Pete, why don't you listen to these? It might help you out." Honestly, my first inclination was, I don't know. I kind of have my Lenten mixtape of John Michael Talbot and all this stuff ready to go. But it was a providential moment. And like Sheen says, there's a few moments and decisions in life that determine your whole course of life. For me, that was one of them. And for a weekend, I sat and listened to this entire retreat given to priests and seminarians. And while that wasn't what God called me to do, I knew from that one retreat that my entire life was going to be wrapped up in Fulton Sheen, not just personally, but in his mission, especially the daily holy hour, and just what the church needs in this critical time. So that's how I got introduced, and then I was able to do my doctorate on Fulton Sheen, write a book on Fulton Sheen, and then everything I've done since then has been, how do I bring him into the heart of every home?
How many times are you amazed, even overwhelmed, and I know many of us are, when we listen? Of course, we run so many different segments of his talks on the air still at EWTN, which is so awesome because he has so much material with which we can share with our listeners. But I listened to him talking about the evils of the world, and Peter, they're evergreen. They're about exactly what's happening right now.
They are, exactly. And he understood the roots of everything. He always talked about, like, you can look at wars and see how those things develop. But he says, if you don't understand the revolution underneath it, then you'll never really understand what's going on. He says, only those with faith really know what's going on in the world. It's a strong statement. But when you do that, when you look through it with a theological lens, you can see everything that's happening, and it's like a tree. From an acorn to what it is today, this is the fruits of what he talked about, what he even prophesied about. He said we're at the end of an era. And so what he said during his life is even more important and more relevant now. And that's another reason why I think every Catholic needs to rediscover what he had to say about our moment right now.
Now, I'm imagining that this will all be in person, or are you sharing any of this online? We
do have a plan to share it online as well. So you can find that information on our website, FultonSheenConference.com. That way we can reach people outside the United States. We have conversations with other countries. So this is a project in the works that's just expanding. God's blessing it. And so, yes, we have a streaming option that will be available.
Okay, that's great. Well, we'll have to have you back on as it gets closer, unless you sell out, which I'm sure you will. How are the ticket sales going already?
I have to check with my wife, but we have our whole team that's on that. I'm focusing on all the content, so we kind of stay in our zones. But I know it's going well, but we are also trying to reach a lot of people even within the local community of St. Louis. A lot of times they don't even realize that something's in their backyard. And this is like the singular event that's leading up to the beatification. And I can't stress that enough. That's extraordinary. So don't miss this. This is a once-in-a-lifetime experience that will never, ever happen again, ever. So I always tell people, don't miss this opportunity to be a part of history.
Yeah, September 23rd, it's taking place in St. Louis at the Hilton St. Louis, and it is going to be an amazing conference. I mean, the speakers, as you just heard us review the lineup, I mean, it's just crazy. All these people in one place, and when you realize who's speaking, you're going to want to go either in person, online, or maybe even both. Monsignor Landry, Jason Jones, Sister Dee Dee, oh my goodness, it's just going to be incredible. Dale Ahlquist as well. And, of course, Monsignor Landry, we love him. He's fantastic, one of our regular commentators here at EWTN. Peter, thank you so much. The conference is coming up September 23rd in St. Louis, FultonSheenConference.com. 27 minutes past the hour on a Monday. Looking forward to our time with our guest, Robert Greving, author of the book, The Apostolate of Courtesy. How to Save Souls and Change the World Through the Power of Manners. Let me read just a brief summary of this beautiful book. It seems like such a little thing, but it can make the difference between heaven and hell. A good Christian aims to be virtuous, but what if we are not courteous? We may check the boxes for fortitude and fear of the Lord, but if we don't keep our appointments or spend too much time online or can't be bothered to answer an email, we become worse disciples and less effective at making new ones. I cannot wait to dive into this topic. Robert, thanks for joining us this morning. And I was telling you during the break when we were chatting earlier that I thought it was very providential that Gail Buckley, who was with us on Mondays with her scripture verse of the week, the verse, and this happens quite a bit where the Holy Spirit is at work here. Proverbs 12:18, there is one whose rash words are like sword thrusts, but the tongue of the wise brings healing. So how did you get interested in this whole idea of courtesy and how important it is?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on here.
You're welcome.
It's quite an honor. I think part of it had to do with the way I was raised. I had parents who believed very strongly in manners. Now, whether or not I followed that as well as I should have is another point. But then also a lot of it was reading a lot of St. Francis de Sales, who plays a big part in this book, because if you read him...
Patron saint of journalists, by the way.
Yes, and writers. And so he had a lot to say about these matters. My wife had a big influence on me because she lives this whole thing much better than I do. And then I think finally just teaching at school,
right?
We try to teach the boys manners, but boys being boys, they want to know why. Okay, why do I have to do this? Why do I have to do that? And so I just started writing down answers to that, and then I thought, maybe looking around, maybe more people than just the boys at school need this. Yeah. Well,
I'm sure in your work and you teach Latin and English and grammar, and you're based, the school, by the way, Heights School, is based in Maryland, and you've been doing this for many years. But I'm sure over the years, especially with the development of technology and all of the what we call them tools, sometimes they're used as tools, sometimes they're used as weapons, as you well know. I would imagine you've seen this get a lot worse beyond young people, right?
Yes, and I think anybody in the media knows that because I think probably because there's less accountability now. You can get out there and say anything or post anything, and there's not the accountability that there used to be, and there's just so much more access to getting things out there. So you're giving sort of people carte blanche to say what's ever on their minds, and that's usually not a good idea.
Now, in the summary of the book, as I just shared with our listeners, you're talking about how it may seem like small things, but there are little things, I think, that speak very loudly in terms of our actions. How do we know where to draw the line in terms of if we don't answer emails? Because many of us, and I'm sure it's the same for you in your position, get a lot of emails, and simply spending the time to answer each and every one of them could take up 8 hours or more.
Right. So it's kind of a broad question. I think that's where, a lot of these other virtues come into play, such as prudence or temperance. If it's obviously if it's a spam email, I don't answer it. I tend to be sort of a technological Luddite. I don't even have a smartphone. I just have my flip phone. So I avoid a lot of it that way. But I think for people who are in positions that get a lot of those, it is just a matter of prudence and, not only in terms of if it's spam, but just in terms of what is this person trying to do? Is this person honestly asking me for help or maybe giving me a good piece of advice? Or is that person just venting at me? If the person's just venting at me, is my responding to that person going to actually help or not? And you leave it to the Holy Spirit. You make a judgment and you move on. Yeah.
But in terms of our other actions, what do you see out there in the Catholic world that frustrates you with the lack of courtesy?
Gosh, in the Catholic world, I hate to kind of point fingers at my own people. I think a lot of it is, it's hard to say here. I think at Mass, frankly, we go there. It's the sacrifice of our Lord, and now, over my time, it's gotten a lot better. Okay, so I kind of grew up in the crazy days of the 60s and 70s and things like that. So since that time, it's gotten a lot better. But it's still, when we're there, we should be mindful of why we're there and dress appropriately, behave appropriately. And then when that's over with, okay, if we want to talk, if we want to do whatever else, then let's leave there. Also, I think just in terms of, my wife works a lot with the Gabriel Project, okay? So that's helping mothers facing unexpected pregnancies. And so there's just a lot of, this is what I'm trying to get across in the book. You may not have, we think of evangelizing or apostolate as I got to get out there and quote scripture or defend church teaching. But you're not even going to get there if you're a jerk, to put it bluntly.
Right.
So just being friendly to people. Talking to your neighbor, it doesn't have to be about the faith. It can just be about, how's your daughter doing? Or what about that storm last night? Or people at the grocery store. And I think if we just kind of, I don't want to say lowered our sights, but that's kind of what we got to do. We got to get at the ground level more with people and then work our way up. I'm not saying we discount the scripture quoting and the doctrinal defending and all that, but nobody's going to take you seriously if you're mean or, as you said, if you're a jerk. I mean, it's not rocket science. Right. But we tend to get over that. I mean, that speech that you played by the Archbishop just before this segment was it sent chills up my spine, because I think he hits the nail on the head there in profound ways. We have this interior life, and we have to be people of the gospel before you could preach the gospel, and part of that is just being courteous to people.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yep. Yeah. We're talking with author Robert Greving, who is in studio with us today. The Apostolate of Courtesy, How Good Manners Make You a Better Evangelist, is published by our friends at Catholic Answers Press. I started to tell you before the music began and we had to start the program about experiences I've had, and many people in public life, and I'm sure you do too, because you're a teacher and you may hear from people who don't agree with what you're doing or whatever. But I can remember one instance that stands out in my mind was of one of my followers who was disagreeing, and after that point I stopped engaging on Facebook. I use it for evangelization because usually it's just going down a rabbit hole with people. And this woman was going after my followers, and she was claiming that she's a faithful Catholic. But Robert, she was so rude and so mean, and she did the yelling in writing with the capital letters and the big exclamation points. And I told her, I said, stop, I'm going to kick you off of my Facebook page. I said, why are you being so mean? She says, well, I tell it like it is. And I said, and you're not getting anywhere. You're not reaching anyone. You're just being mean. How do people think that that's an effective way to evangelize?
Well, I think that's the culture we live in. We live in a culture where the idea is to get attention and to get attention and to get attention. So however you do that, which is usually escalating your language and escalating the words that you use or the threats that you use, that's what gets attention, at least in the short run, and at least to some people. Now, I think, what needs to get across to people, and I try to do this in the book, is if you look at people who are really effective, okay, you look at I hear the music coming on.
Yep.
So, okay,
that's
we can
the
get back
musical
to
chair,
that.
so we have to sit down and stop.
All right.
As we say. But hold that thought, and we'll come back. Really enjoying this conversation. So important. The Apostolate of Courtesy, How Good Manners Make You a Better Evangelist, published by our friends at Catholic Answers. We'll be right back. The book is The Apostolate of Courtesy, How Good Manners Make You a Better Evangelist, published by Catholic Answers. In the book, our guest, Robert Greving, draws on the writings of the great St. Francis de Sales to argue that courteous behavior is not merely being nice, but a theological and practical aspect of evangelization. So I want folks to get your book as a fellow author. So best place, obviously, we have it at the Religious Catalog. It's also published, as we mentioned, by our friends at Catholic Answers. Can you kind of give us a breakdown of the book? And we want people to read it, of course, and buy it. But can you just kind of give us an idea of how you broke it down? Okay,
so I start out by sort of getting the theoretical background to it, or the theological. I mean, what is courtesy? What is it not? What are some of the objections to it? Why is it important? What do I mean by an apostolate of courtesy? And then getting into maybe some of the key virtues or things that we need, rules and basic overall rules of courtesy. Then the book kind of goes down different aspects of that, such as our dress, our deportment. I spent a lot of time on conversation and talking with people, and that is both meaning online or just in general, the conversations you have with people every day, or writing letters or things like that. Walking through table manners. I know that may seem like a small thing, but it wasn't to my mom and dad. And then, how we behave at Mass and things like that. So it's kind of divided, I guess, into here's the theoretical background to this. Why is this whole thing important? And then some key virtues that we're dealing with here, and then the practical aspects in different parts of our life.
Okay. Yeah. And as you say in the book, too, I think this is a huge point, that it seems so simple. But I truly believe that unless you can have a relationship with someone first, and they believe that you're sincere and that you're a decent person that's not judging them, then you can slowly move forward. And how they come into the church, if they do come into the church, that's not up to us. That's up to them and God. They have to work that out themselves. But you can't start by hitting someone over the head with the Bible and the Catechism. It doesn't work.
Right, and that's kind of what I was getting to at the end of the last segment, is when people go to that route of being extreme, or writing in all capital letters, it may work in the short run, but if you look at the history of good evangelizers, okay, and we can, I was just thinking as I got here today, I was thinking, for example, David Anders, who's seems just Mr. Pleasant himself. Right. Bishop Barron, or I write a lot about G.K. Chesterton, or Ronald Knox, or Fulton Sheen. It takes a lot of biting your lip and maybe clenching your fist and not saying anything, but in the long run, those people do more than, as you said, the people who write in exclamation points.
Well, I think also, you gave some excellent examples, Dr. Dave and of course Bishop Barron, two excellent communicators, but they don't mince words when it comes to the truth of the faith, but the way they do it so eloquently and calmly and confidently with love, right? Right,
and I think that's an excellent point, because some people will take, you want to be courteous, you want to be nice, that means we have to roll over and let people just jump on us. No, not at all. And again, look at a lot of the great evangelizers, a lot of the great Catholic journalists. It does mean saying things calmly and maybe quietly, but forcefully, but it doesn't mean compromising the truth at all. And again, I think when you do it in that way, when you do it in a calm, rational manner, it gets across a lot more than it does the other way.
How much of it do you think, and you're a teacher, so you can sense this as an educator, is it that we're not considering where that other person might be? It's not that we have to be a mind reader, but we have no idea. I mean, you may have a better, more intimate relationship because you know your students and you're with them for several years. But we're trying to reach someone, let's say they're a stranger online or someone who's, interested in something, and automatically assuming something about them beforehand. We don't know how the Holy Spirit is working in their lives, correct?
Correct. And that's a really good point, because even if we take this back to the days before the internet or whatever, it was very hard. You always had to find out, where's that person coming from? What's behind this question that you're asking? Now you multiply that with the internet, where, in other words, when you're talking to somebody, someone comes up to you and just starts talking to you, well, you can look at that person. You can see, does he or she look distressed, happy, tired, or whatever. So you have a lot of nonverbal information to go on when you start talking with that person that can help you. In the internet, you have none of that. You just get this black and white email with a name, sometimes, or just a handle, for example. And so you have no idea where that person's coming from. So it's really hard to make any kind of judgment as to how you should respond. And then, you got to go into, well, tell me about yourself. Where did you, why are you saying this? Who are you, or what have you? So again, I don't mean to be too much of an anti-technology person here as I'm sitting here in the EWTN studios, but I mean, it really makes it a lot more difficult. I mean, even with people who know each other well, and we know this as husbands and wives or parents and sons, you get a text from that person and you can't tell what's behind it, even with the emojis or something. So sometimes you respond in a way that you shouldn't because you think that person's hitting in a certain way. And so all that, again, is getting back to the courtesy aspect of it. It's just we need to be very attentive to the other person and careful.
How does sincerity, Robert, play into all of this? Because I was telling the students a couple weeks ago, one of the students asked me after my presentation, because I gave them a mini version of my testimony and how I got lost in the world and was doing a lot of the things that the Archbishop said we shouldn't have been doing. I was worried about myself most of all, because before I got knocked off my on my high horse by Jesus and the church and came back to the church, thanks be to God, which was not an easy process for God and my husband, trust me. And still a work in progress. But I was transparent with the students, and one student asked me, he said, I'm really struck by your transparency in terms of your journey. How can you do that? Why are you doing that? And I said, because I have to be sincere. You don't need to know everything that happened to me, but I have to tell you because I don't want you doing the same thing I did. And I think my point was, and I think they got it, that sincerity and being honest and transparent with people and loving them enough, you care about them enough to share something that happened to you along the way. So sincerity goes along with courtesy, does it not?
Oh, definitely. And I think, again, there's some prudence there. As you said, with these students, you wouldn't tell them everything. But I think people really appreciate that because, Christ should be a part of who we are. So when we're sharing Christ, we got to, in a sense, share who we are. And I just, you talk about sincerity there. There's a quote from Francis de Sales who said, "A sincerity that is not charitable comes from a charity that is not sincere." So you can be very sincere with people as to where you've been, or what you need to tell them, but that has to proceed from charity. I think we know that as parents or just as friends. Sometimes a friend asks you advice, and you have to say, "I don't think that's a good idea." But if that's proceeding from charity and not from trying to get back at the other person or condemn the other person,
right?
That works a lot. And this whole apostolate, or whatever you want to call it, that you guys have here at EWTN is full of people who are being very sincere about who they are,
right?
And that again goes a long way. They're being courteous because they're trying to get other people, as you said, the whole idea here is I want you to have what I have, which is a joy and a faith and a reason to get up in the morning.
Well, everybody is like so nice. I remember the first time, this was years ago when I first went to EWTN. I just started in Catholic. I don't think I was in Catholic media yet. It was right before I started at Catholic radio. And I was like, where am I? I felt like in The Wizard of Oz. Everybody was so nice. I'm like, where am I? But they're always like that. That's just who they are. But it does, in this world that can be so cruel, especially online, and you get to a place like that, it feels like you're in this amazing place, a little slice of heaven here on earth, right?
Right. And I think the point that we're dealing with here is, so I teach right outside of Washington, D.C.
God love you.
Oh, yeah. But I mean, there are lots of wonderful people there, not just at the school where I teach. Of course, I think they're all wonderful there. But, again, I think it's part of the issue that we have to kind of help ourselves with is that the courteous person is not going to get the headlines. The courteous person is not going to be the one that's on the evening news or whatever. So just because you don't hear about them doesn't mean they're not there. They are there. And I think we all know them if we just stop and think of people who have had a big influence on our lives. They've been the nice teacher, the neighbor next door who made meals for you while your parents were sick, or whatever. We know these people are out there, so don't get overwhelmed by you just got to stop and think, yes, they're there, and I can be one of these too, and it doesn't matter if anybody sees me or not. It's just I tend my little garden every day, and that's what God wants me to do, regardless of what it does, because it will get out there.
But what the Archbishop said in that clip that we played from his wonderful talk, he's talking about the fact that, when you're getting that message out there, you're thinking, I have to do this for myself, or it's all about me. Your task is not merely to produce content, but to cultivate trust, not merely to report events, but to help people see reality clearly, not merely to increase traffic, but to increase understanding. The world does not simply need faster news, it needs wiser voices. And I think wiser voices, that goes along with your apostolate of courtesy, because if you're wise, you're going to respect the other person enough to be polite.
Exactly. And again, you go back, that whole talk, when I was listening to it, it really was wonderful because, I kind of start out my book this way because this is where Francis de Sales would start it. You have to have an interior life. This isn't just about what fork to use at dinner or saying please and thank you, although there's that there. You have to have a life of prayer and an interior life, because to try to be courteous to people is a very difficult thing these days. You have to back it up with preparing yourself through prayer, and I think the Archbishop hit that on the head too.
Yeah, and I also think we need to, like that old Kenny Rogers song, right? You have to know when to hold them, know when to fold them, and we're not going to reach all people all the time, even if we are sincere and courteous.
Right. I mean, it's like what Mother Teresa said. God doesn't call me to be successful. He calls me to be faithful. And so at the end of the day, you just ask yourself, did I do my part? You know, the Holy Spirit will do his part. I got to ask myself, did I do my part?
Yeah. So the final advice, do you think, any words of wisdom? We have about a minute left that you'd like to share. I know we want people to get the book and looking forward to your interviews on EWTN TV, but any final thoughts, Robert?
Well, I guess I would just say, think about people who have made a difference in your life and what made that difference. And I'm certain it was they provided you with good content, but it was probably a lot about who that person was. And then try to be like that person, which would be a courteous person.
Yeah. We didn't even get to the manners part in terms of why manners also matter. And you mentioned it is more than the table setting.
Yeah.
But the whole thing about the way you dress, the way you present yourself, that's very important too in terms of respecting people. And what would you suggest for the folks to get the book? Obviously, we have it at the religious catalog at EWTN, but Catholic Answers also, correct?
Correct. Yeah, and it's on Amazon too. So.
All the best. This is a fantastic book and really appreciate it. Enjoyed our conversation. Robert Greving in studio with us this morning. The book, The Apostolate of Courtesy, that changed souls and changed the world through the power of manners. We'll be right back. Thanks so much for tuning into the first hour of EWTN's Catholic Connection on a Monday, July 20th, 2026. And I hope you enjoyed the interview with Robert Greving about his book, The Apostolate of Courtesy. And it makes me chuckle because I was thinking about the chapter I wrote in my Rosie book, Everything's Coming Up Rosie, 10 Things My Feisty Italian and My American Mother Taught Me About Living a Godly Life. One of the chapters was Be Nice. Because she always told me, and she also told my sisters as well, be nice, be nice, be nice. Now, she didn't want us to be pushovers, but what she was trying to say, and I really examined this, as you get older, you think about what your parents have told you growing up. It's pretty amazing because when you're kind to people, and again, as Robert said, simple acts of kindness can make such a difference. So get a copy of that book, Apostolate of Courtesy. So look forward to our next hour. Dan Burke is going to be joining us from the Avila Institute on Spiritual Direction. They have a beautiful event coming up online this week. It is actually running July 23rd through the 25th, so there's still time to register. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we're also going to be chatting with Dr. Theresa Farnan, and she is an expert on transgender ideology. She is a fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center. And this morning we are going to be discussing how many school districts are still in violation of the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, hiding transgenderism from parents. She has great information for parents and what we can do to make a difference here. We'll be right back.
Welcome to Catholic Connection with Theresa Tamio, keeping you connected to your faith and your world. Theresa tackles the issues of faith and culture, the pro-life message, and media awareness. And now, here's Theresa Tamio.
And it's hour number 2 of Catholic Connection on EWTN's Radio Extra. So appreciate you listening to us every day, beginning on this Monday, July 20th already. Can't believe it. Deacon Dom and I have been here since right after Easter. So what was it, April 26th when we arrived? And I can't believe our 3 months are already up because we've really enjoyed it and we've been making new friends here and we've been going to some really cool places, especially those associated with our faith. And never a dull moment in this country. There's always something new to discover. I think I mentioned just last week that a few weeks ago we went over to the town of Rocco Pereira, which is the hometown of St. Rita of Cascia. Cascia is right next door. But when we've led pilgrims to see the tomb and venerate the tomb of the great St. Rita of Cascia, we spend our time in Cascia, not going over to Rocco Pereira. And the next time we take a group there to Cascia to see and meet St. Rita, we are going to go to her hometown. That's just one area that we've been. We've been to a number of other places associated with great saints here in central Italy. So God willing, we'll be back in September And then we have our pilgrimage with Dr. Bunsen in October. So excited about that, in the footsteps of the popes. And we're also going to be visiting a site in the life of St. Francis of Assisi during that pilgrimage in honor of course, the 800th anniversary of the great saint, St. Francis of Assisi. So ask for your prayers as Deacon Dom and I fly back to the States after the show today, landing in Metro Detroit later. Well, I should say we're going back in time. It's kind of like Back to the Future. Is that what it goes? Because you have to go back because we're 6 hours ahead here in Italy. Anyway, appreciate your support and your prayers and your listenership. Coming up on the program today, you don't want to miss our interview with Dan Burke. Dan Burke, of course, is with the Avila Institute for Spiritual Direction. Speaking of which, they have a powerful conference that's coming up this week online, July 23rd through the 25th. We'll have all the details. And then we will be having a very detailed interview with Dr. Theresa Farnan. She's a fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center, and she is an expert in this whole issue of trans ideology. And we're going to take a look at the incredible obstinance of those who are pushing this ideology. School districts in violation of the Family Education Rights and Privacy Act. These are the cases where teachers in school districts work together to hide transgenderism from parents. So if a young person, regardless how young, comes to a counselor, comes to a teacher, a school official, and says, gee, I think I'm a boy when I'm a girl, or vice versa, they don't let the parents know. Now, if there were any other issue that a child was facing, they would be on the phone in a moment's notice, as they should be, but not when it comes to this. So they're hiding it still from parents, despite all the laws, despite all the cases, including the recent Supreme Court case. So that's a look at the rundown, as we say, hour number 2 of EWTN's Radio Extra, July 20th. But as always, we get started with the news and the weather for you right here. The National Weather Service is saying Canadian wildfire smoke pushing into the Midwest and worsening air quality. A frontal system is bringing severe storms from the northern plains to the mid-Atlantic over the next few days, and heavy Gulf Coast rain is possible as we continue to monitor different storms that are persisting in the southwest with heavy rainfall. We also have hazardous heat expected from the plains into the lower Mississippi Valley. Now let's take a look at the news on a Monday morning, July 20th, here at EWTN. Pope Leo urging Christians to reject the temptation to seek spectacular displays of God's power, reminding the faithful the kingdom of God grows quietly and patiently, like a tiny seed or a little yeast working unseen. Addressing pilgrims gathered for the Sunday Angelus in Castel Gandolfo, the Pope reflecting on 3 parables from St. Matthew's Gospel, the wheat and the weeds, the mustard seed, and the yeast, which he says reveals the way God acts in history and the lives of men and women. He said rather than imposing himself by force or arriving in triumph, God chooses smallness as a sign of his discreet and patient love. He said he leaves us to freely accept or reject him, noting that God's love makes its presence felt even among the weeds and works invisibly, such as the smallest of seeds, transforming the world silently, such as yeast in dough. He also said Christians are called to recognize the kingdom grows even amid the presence of evil, requiring us to learn to discern the good that continues to emerge despite darkness, resisting the temptation to make hasty judgments, and patiently accompanying the gradual work of God's grace. And from Vatican News, Nathan Morley tells us a new UNICEF analysis is warning the global economic shock triggered by the conflict in the Mideast could leave more than 23 million additional children at risk of monetary poverty by the end of the year, reversing years of progress and deepening inequality.
In a recent interview, the UNICEF spokesperson James Elder said the ceasefire in Gaza has become a cruel and deadly illusion. Since it was announced in October 2025, over 250 Palestinian children have reportedly been killed across Gaza. That's an average of 1 child every day, whilst more than 400 others have been injured, many with severe and life-changing wounds. Mr. Elder said that children continue to be killed in places where they should be safe, including homes, schools and shelters, and stressed that the constant exposure to violence has left Gaza's children with a profound psychological trauma, affecting their ability to eat, sleep, and develop normally.
These children were not killed in a war zone. They were killed in their homes. They were killed in their schools. They were killed playing football. They were killed fishing. They were shot. They were bombed. They were struck by quadcopters. While the world continues to speak the language of ceasefire, families in Gaza continue to bury their children. However, if a child is being killed every day, surely the debate now is no longer about the quality of this ceasefire. It's about the credibility of calling it one.
Generally, Gaza is battling a multitude of problems. For example, a severe shortage of engine oil, tyres and spare parts are placing life-saving humanitarian operations at risk across the Strip. According to the ICRC, the overall water production in Gaza has dropped radically to around 40% of what it was before October 2023. The situation has deteriorated rapidly in recent months, largely due to shortages of chemicals and spare parts. Today, for over 70% of the population, the primary source of drinking water is truck deliveries sponsored by UNRWA and other partners. For Vatican Radio, this is Nathan Morley reporting.
President Trump wants Iran added to a bipartisan Russian sanctions bill. The measure would impose mandatory sanctions on Russian political and military leaders, as well as oligarchs, state-owned enterprises, and foreign companies that support Russia's defense and industrial base. In a Truth Social post yesterday, Trump called on Republicans to add Iran to the bill, writing that it's what the late Senator Lindsey Graham wanted to do. And the U.S. military says it has completed the 8th straight night of airstrikes against Iran following the deaths of 2 U.S. service members by an Iranian air attack. U.S. Central Command saying in a statement that the strikes were launched over the weekend at President Trump's direction and are aimed at punishing Iranian forces who killed those 2 service members at the military base in Jordan. Meanwhile, Energy Secretary Chris Wright says the U.S. mission against Iran will go on until President Trump's objective is received. Wright speaking on ABC's This Week yesterday, saying Trump's mission is essential for peace in the Middle East and peace in the world as well.
The president is always looking for the diplomatic off-ramp. President Trump wants to end it with a peaceful agreement with Iran, but it takes 2 parties to do that.
Wright was also asked if the president planned to retaliate further in response to the death of 2 American service members after that Iranian attack over the weekend. He responded by saying it's tragic to lose lives, but this is a mission, he said, that will save countless lives going forward. Meanwhile, as Rob Martier reports, President Trump is fuming over heavy smoke from those Canadian wildfires.
President Trump threatened to raise tariffs to cover the cost associated with unhealthy air quality. On social media Friday, Trump said we're holding Canada responsible and that the cost of the pollution must be added to the tariffs that Canada is paying. The president added that Canada was not properly maintaining their forests and brush terrain, and the United States is being unnecessarily invaded by filthy, polluted, and unhealthy air. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney blamed the fires on climate change, which he said is the responsibility of all countries, including the U.S. I'm Rob Martier.
And those clouds of Canadian wildfire smoke are drifting even further into the U.S. Air quality alerts have now been issued from the upper Midwest and New England to as far south as Washington, D.C. Over 900 wildfires are burning across Canada, sending smoke into the Northeast and the Mid-Atlantic and the Midwest as well. Jim Forbes tells us Andrew Tate and his brother have been arrested in Miami.
The social media influencers notorious for their sexist views were arrested by federal marshals on Saturday on criminal charges of rape and sex trafficking in the UK. A news release from the UK's Crown Prosecution Service says 39-year-old Andrew Tate has been charged with 7 counts of rape, 3 counts of sex trafficking, 3 counts of assault, and other offenses. His brother, 38-year-old Tristan Tate, is being charged with 2 counts of rape, sexual assault, and sex trafficking. British authorities are seeking their extradition. I'm Jim Forbes.
5 members of a family have been found dead after a flash flood raced through a Utah campground. A local sheriff said that they were called to the Sunglow campground less than 2 miles from Bicknell after a young man's body was found over the weekend. Search and rescue crews later found the bodies of 2 more men. All 3 were apparently caught up in flash flooding. The bodies of 2 more family members were found on Sunday. And there's a severe storm front headed to the Midwest this week. Forecasters are warning of thunderstorms, reducing hail, damaging winds, and torrential downpours, starting this afternoon with Wisconsin getting the worst of it. Wind gusts could hit 70 miles per hour, and isolated tornadoes are possible. And tomorrow, that storm front will push into the lower Midwest, including much of Ohio. Those storms could produce lightning strikes capable of sparking wildfires, and they could also, however, clear up those Canadian wildfires that have been blanketing the area with their smoke. Larry Kofsky tells us New York City health officials are saying a second person has now died from Legionnaire's disease in connection with the outbreak on Manhattan's Upper East Side.
The death of the latest victim, whose identity has not been made public, comes even as the city reports a sharp decline in new Legionnaire's cases, from 8 per day at the start of the outbreak to less than 1 per day since July 10th. As of yesterday, there have been 72 confirmed cases. 50 people have been discharged from the hospital. 9 people remain hospitalized. I'm Larry Kofsky.
And Jim Forbes tells us Hyundai is recalling over 47,000 Kona SUVs for a defect with the rear center seatbelt.
The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration says the recall covers nearly 48,000 vehicles, including certain 2025 Hyundai Kona Electric and 2026 Hyundai Kona models. The automaker said the rear center seatbelt buckle may fail to properly restrain a passenger during a crash. Hyundai is advising owners not to use the rear center seating position until it's repaired. Owner notification letters are expected to be mailed September 11th, and dealers will replace the rear center seat buckle assembly free of charge. I'm Jim Forbes.
And new information shows the World Cup raised consumer spending around the U.S. last month. The Bank of America Institute found that consumer spending using credit and debit cards increased over 6% from a year ago. That's the biggest jump in over 4 years. The information shows higher consumer spending, mainly at restaurants and bars. It also found many lower-income households increase their spending at local businesses in host cities. That's a look at the news on a Monday morning, July 20th. Catholic Connection continues right after these messages. Thanks for listening to EWTN, more specifically this program, Catholic Connection. Great to chat with Dan Burke. He's the founder and president of the Avila Institute for Spiritual Formation, offering graduate and personal enrichment studies in spiritual theology to priests, deacons, religious, and laity, not only here in the U.S., but in 72 countries, and preparing men for the seminary in some 14 dioceses now. He's the author and editor of more than 15 books on authentic Catholic spirituality, hosting the Divine Intimacy radio show with his wife Stephanie, broadcast weekly here on EWTN Radio. And this morning, Dan's joining us to talk about a really important summit that's coming up regarding spiritual warfare and the family. Dan, great to talk to you again, my friend. How are you?
Oh, couldn't be more blessed, and great to be with you.
All right, so this is a really, really important topic. Those two things coming together, spiritual warfare and the family. So first of all, give us the housekeeping details. I know this is all online, so tell us how, when, where, how do we register?
July 23rd to the 25th, and folks can register at spiritualdirection.com in events, or they can just do spiritualdirection.com/family. And a lot of amazing speakers. I know many of them you know. Father Carlos Martins of the Exorcist Files, Father Pope, Monsignor Charles Pope, I should say.
Monsignor Pope was amazing, yeah.
Yeah, Stephen Rossetti. So just a lot of really extraordinary experts that will help us understand how the enemy's trying to break up, damage, destroy our families.
I was looking at the rundown at the schedule. You do have a separate track about marriage. Tell us about that and why you decided, which I think is great because it's certainly needed. What's the focus? What are some of the different topics?
Yeah, since the last time I talked with you, Stephanie and I have forced by a Mother Superior to establish divine intimacy and marriage retreats, and in and through that, we just have discovered how incredibly constant and difficult the battle is to work with families, and the enemy works to divide and destroy families. I'm reminded of Sister Lucia, who wrote in 1983 to Cardinal Caffarra about the JP2 Institute for Marriage and Family, and she said, he asked for her prayers, and she said, "Father, a time will come when the decisive battle between the kingdom of Christ and Satan will be over marriage and the family." And so we've just immersed ourselves more fully into that battle and seen it, and I think understand the fundamental patterns that the enemy uses and strategies we can undertake to overcome them to help our families grow and be healthy.
Yeah. Talking with Dan Burke regarding this beautiful event, which is coming up July 23rd through the 25th. It's online, and you can go to spiritualdirection.com. And, of course, this is brought to us by the Avila Institute, Spiritual Warfare and the Family Summit. And as you just said, that great quote, the final battle will be over marriage and the family. And how people can register online, and then are these talks taped in case people don't make the actual weekend and can come back to it? Is there a fee you can pay to watch it later?
Yeah, that's one of the benefits of doing a summit like this, is that folks they have the option of watching it live, or they can watch recorded sessions afterward, multiple times, and even do small groups if they want, to help friends and family who weren't able to make it to the summit to get the content. We really want to get it out there and make it accessible to anyone, just because, as you know, it's no surprise the battle's raging. I don't know often how accessible the tools are out there to overcome the challenges we face, but this will be a very powerful approach to making those tools more accessible.
So you have a marriage path, you have a youth path, and you have a singles path, which is great, and then you have a bundle that you're offering people can save. But this is awesome that you have 3 different areas that you're covering in terms of different groups. In your ministry, Dan, what are you and Stephanie seeing in terms of some of the biggest challenges families are facing right now?
Funny enough, the biggest, let's get to the root. It's really about the spiritual life. When families have a sound spiritual life, most families don't even know what that means, but when they do and they have that, they get through issues way easier, faster, better than those who don't. When families understand things like discernment of spirits, they understand that, we tell husbands and wives that not all the thoughts, not all the words or ideas you hear coming from your spouse are actually coming from your spouse. The enemy is constantly trying to twist and distort, intentions and language and things that then tap into our wounds, and then we react to that sort of thing. So really the most powerful antidote is a deep relationship with the Lord. How to get to that, and then how to apply wisdom of things like discernment of spirits from St. Ignatius or Carmelite insights on prayer is what we'll be talking about.
So there will be some really great steps and some basics that people can apply to their lives if they're not there yet, correct?
Yeah, I mean, we're super practical, right? In my opinion, if we're always in the clouds, what are we doing for people? This isn't going to be a theological conference. This is it's more akin to what tools and weapons do you need to battle, better, and how do you, once you stop watching any of these keynotes or a video, if you get the recording, you should walk away with clear action steps on how to deal with whatever it is wherever you're struggling.
Could you give us just a few? We have about 3 minutes left. I know we can't go into this, and I really want people to register for this wonderful conference because there'll be much, much more detail and meat by going online and watching this and taking in all this great information. But I would think one thing to do is obviously pray together as a family. I think reading scripture together is really important. What else?
Yeah, pray, but having your own private prayer life of daily mental prayer, where there's a reason that several doctors of the church have said if you're not practicing mental prayer, you're not going to make it to heaven. And it's because you're not awake. You're not as aware of your own brokenness, your own wounds. You're not as prepared to deal with them spiritually. So when you have that daily encounter with the Lord, your compass is reset, Your eyes are wide open. You enter into the day. You're ready for the battles rather than just, for years I just up and out of the bed and into the battle and not really awake to what's going on and was defeated. And it's a beautiful thing to be on the other side of that.
Mm-hmm. I think, we wake up, we may exercise, and we take our vitamins and drink our water, and maybe have that cup of coffee, right, get the shower, everything's done, everything is, planned that we have to do, make our kids' lunches, whatever. But I find that if I don't do the readings, Dominic and I usually do them together, but then I do morning prayer on my own and evening prayer on my own. I don't feel right. And once I do the readings and my morning prayer, it helps me. I can see, I see differently because you're looking at the world through a Catholic lens much more deeply.
Exactly. And you're pushing away darkness. I've seen a possessed person manifest in liturgy of the hours, and we don't think often that the liturgy of the hours is as powerful as it is. So we're just not aware, and this conference is really going to help folks get their arms around what it means to stop being a victim and really be someone who walks in the freedom that Christ paid for all of us.
And even though the people are so well qualified, such as yourself, and have an extensive background in spiritual warfare, in discernment of spirits, theology, as you said, it's very, very practical, which I think is great. So again, how do they find out about it?
spiritualdirection.com/family or spiritualdirection.com. Just hit the events page and you'll see all of our events there.
How's registration going so far?
Really well. It seems to be a real point of interest. I think there's a lot of suffering out there, so I think folks are excited about getting better equipped to deal with all that.
Well, you know what? I think, Dan, that this is a great conference, online event, even for those, maybe they're not having praise God, a crisis in their life right now. But we live in a fallen world, and it's not a matter of, if, it's a matter of when that something else might happen, and we don't want to get thrown for a loop, so we need to stay close to the Lord. So check this out, spiritualdirection.com, coming up July 23rd, 25th. Dan Burke is just one of the amazing speakers that will be available for you with great information on how to protect your family. We'll be right back. Huge fan of the work of the friends at the Ethics and Public Policy Center. Dr. Theresa Farnan is a PhD and a fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center, focusing on the challenges of gender ideology. Talk about someone who's very busy. She's the co-author of 2 books, and that would be Get Out Now, Why You Should Pull Your Children from Public Schools Before It's Too Late, and Where Did I Come From? Where Am I Going? How Do I Get There? And she's the editor of Gender Ideology and Pastoral Practice, a handbook for Catholic clergy, counselors, and ministerial leaders, and she's co-authored 4 chapters in that very important resource. Theresa, great to have you on the program again, but boy, I'll tell you, no rest for the weary. Here we have a big Supreme Court victory, and then shortly after that victory, a big story that breaks, and there are others, but let's look at the one that came down about, I think it was, maybe close to 2 weeks ago. A Maryland school district being sued after parents accused school officials of hiding their daughter's social gender transition and then citing district policy to justify keeping them in the dark. America First Legal leading the lawsuit on behalf of anonymous parents identified as John and Jane Doe. The plaintiffs arguing the school district and the policies violate their First and 14th Amendment rights, as well as similar provisions of the Maryland Constitution. The lawsuit filed in the U.S. District Court for the District of Maryland, and it's part of a growing wave of legal challenges targeting school districts with policies allowing staff to withhold information about a student's gender identity from parents. Also comes after the U.S. Supreme Court decision regarding the situation with the gender issue that we learned about last month with the Supreme Court. Theresa, it never ends. So what's your reaction, first of all, to this story in Maryland? Thanks for joining us this morning.
Oh, yeah. Thank you so much for highlighting this. Well, it just illustrates that even though I think a lot of parents felt a sense of complacency because of the Trump administration's executive orders at the start of the Trump second term, and we cannot be complacent because these school districts are committed ideologues and they are continuing to hide children's identities, professed gender identity from their parents. They are continuing to allow boys to have access to girls' bathrooms and girls' sports. And they are continuing to promote these GSAs and other LGBT clubs without parental knowledge. So parents need to understand that even though we have these executive orders and we've had some great rulings coming down from the Supreme Court, we are dealing with people who are committed to advancing an ideology. And so you cannot rest and you cannot assume the fight is over.
So, what happens legally when you have something as high as a Supreme Court decision, and that we still see, as you just said, Doctor, these types of loosey-goosey approaches to the law? Of course, we probably hasn't been handed down yet in terms of it takes time. I get that, but did the Supreme Court decisions mean nothing?
I mean, I think what these school districts are counting on is that there is a whole host of judges at the intermediary level, federal judges not at the level of the Supreme Court, and circuit courts that are going to side with them. So, for example, take the case of the Mirabelli case in California, right? The Mirabelli case was parents and teachers who said, we're uncomfortable with this policy, the California state policy that we have to hide gender identity, students at school identity from the parents, right? So the parents sued. Teachers also joined in the lawsuit and said, we don't like doing this. And initially, a lower court said, yes, this seems to violate parental rights. Then they enacted a stay on the policy. Then the Ninth Circuit interfered and said, no, this is in accord with California law, and we're going to let the schools continue to do that. So in this case, California knew that they had a very liberal Ninth Circuit that would probably uphold that. And that's what these courts are counting on. They're trying to run out the clock until the end of the Trump administration and continue, they're just sort of laying in waiting, counting on these lower courts and counting on keeping these cases tied up because they are ideologues. They do believe that there is such a thing as a transgender child. They are convinced that parents are the bad ones in this situation who are trying to repress a transgender identity and that the child will commit suicide. All of which, the suicide myth has been the biggest manipulative canard that's been used to destroy parental rights and to destroy families. But it doesn't matter to these school districts because they are committed ideologues, and that's what parents need to realize. And while it's easy to look at Maryland and say, well, Maryland has been problematic because Maryland, if you remember, was the site of the Mahmoud decision where the Supreme Court had to say to Montgomery County, no, you cannot force parents to keep their kids in LGBT instruction against their religious beliefs, right? So that came down last year. They're still continuing to do it. So it's easy to say, like, oh, it's Maryland, they're crazy. But the Department of Education has dear colleague letters that target Kansas, which is a red state. And if you go onto the website of Parents Defending Education, you will find plenty of red states still listed there because the commitment to this ideology has permeated our public school system, our teaching colleges, and that's why as parents you cannot relax your vigilance.
We are speaking with Dr. Theresa Farnan. She's a PhD and a fellow at the wonderful Ethics and Public Policy Center, focusing on the challenges of gender ideology as part of the center's Person and Identity Project. And what's the website? Because your information is so helpful, and there's so much available that you offer at the center. How can they find you?
Yeah, we have a website called it's at personandidentity.com, all one word. Okay. And there we have resources for parents, we have resources for dioceses, for individuals, for medical personnel. We really, it's a very comprehensive website. Our staff works really hard to keep it updated. So, and everything there is free. So if you have questions about these materials, we're not monetizing it. We make no money off of it. It is there as a service to the church and as a service to our family.
Before we take a break, we have about 2 minutes. I wanted to ask this question, then we can pick it up on the other side, because I know it's a detailed question. But I always ask experts such as yourself, and I've had this conversation with the wonderful, I'm sure you know his great work, Father Tad, and Dr. Tad Baholchek from the National Catholic Bioethics Center. What is this mindset, this agenda that is just so strong with gender ideology? Obviously, I think money would be part of it because the surgeries are very costly, and then you turn these children or people into lifelong patients, so then you have all the pharmaceuticals. But there seems to be something much deeper in addition to money. What do you think, Theresa?
Oh, yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, the money part of it is why I think you get all these hospitals signing on to it, because there is a huge financial incentive. The transgender surgery and medicalization market is growing like crazy. But for the last number of decades, probably since the 1970s, we've had this growing movement in academia that's referred to as queer theory, that has as its goal ultimately to disrupt and subvert the heterosexual family, the Christian family, right? And to upend our understanding of human sexuality. And that's really what's at the root of this, right? You deconstruct the human person. You deny that the person is made as a unity of body and soul. And instead what you're left with is the person as a collection of desires, where you can declare yourself to be what you want to be, and your body has no meaning and no significance. And once you do that, then it upends all notions of the human family and destroys sexual morality.
More with Dr. Theresa Farnan, and we'll be right back. And we're talking about gender ideology and how, despite some wins, it's still out of control. We need to speak up. It's a great website. If you have any questions, maybe you know someone within your circle of family and friends struggling with these issues regarding gender ideology, check out personandidentity.com. You'll also find the great work of our guest, Dr. Theresa Farnan. She is a PhD and fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center, a writer and a speaker focusing on the challenges of gender ideology as part as EPPC's, as we mentioned, Person and Identity Project. So this has been a long-term goal of the left in terms of, as you said, changing the structure of the family. But they have been, I think, suffering some significant blows, have they not, Theresa?
Oh, yeah, no question. No question. As a movement, they've suffered some real setbacks. But I don't think it hasn't deterred them, mostly because to the people who are ideologues, we are bad people who want to hurt people who identify as transgender. And so in their mind, this is all part of this campaign against persons who identify as transgender. And as a result, there's no attempt made to actually face the reality of what they're talking about when they talk about doing these sex-rejecting procedures on children, or about the effect on the family. I mean, all of that is ignored. And the belief is that if you only validate a person's identity and allow them to do what they want to do with their body, right? Like unlicensed autonomy, children who have sexual rights as, equivalent to adults. Their thinking is that is the key to happiness. And we as Christians are miserable, bad people who are trying to repress our young people and trying to impose a patriarchal morality. What that worldview gives them is the license to disregard facts, to disregard the catastrophic outcomes on the lives of these young people, to disregard the destructive effect on families, and even to disregard the Supreme Court. And that's what you're faced with. These are people who are really convinced that we are all very bad people, and therefore they don't have to listen to us. They don't have to listen to Amy Coney Barrett. They don't have to listen to Brett Kavanaugh or Clarence Thomas or anybody else on the Supreme Court.
Well, what's fascinating about this, and not in a good way, is that despite the Supreme Court decisions, despite the other setbacks that they've had, they keep going. And to me, I think one of the biggest things that's exposing them are the victims of gender ideology, the young people who are speaking out, the Chloe Coles and others who are out there giving their testimonies and making statements, and yet they still deny. They say, oh, they're outliers, there's only a few, but there are thousands of them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the level of vitriol that is hurled at these detransitioners is really actually kind of terrifying. Some of these young people have had to get offline for their own safety and for their own emotional well-being. But again, this comes back to the idea, Hannah Arendt declared that an ideology was an idea that you were determined to follow to its conclusion, regardless of facts and evidence to the contrary, disproving it and showing that it was harmful. So here they have this ideological belief that if you're a man, you can become a woman by carving up your body, and vice versa, a woman can become a man by surgically and chemically altering her body. And they are determined to just keep going because in their mind they've bought into the myth of the transgender child, that there are some people, we have men, we have women, and then there are some people who, quote unquote, are transgender. In other words, they are literally born in the wrong body, and it's up to us to use medicine and social affirmation to allow them to live their most authentic life. That's the belief they have. There is no basis for it in biology, in medicine, or in any other way, but it doesn't matter because it's an ideological belief. And that's what parents need to realize about these, about a lot of the teachers in the public school systems. They've come up through these teaching colleges, and this ideology has been served up to them at every step of their formation, in their teacher development classes, in their method classes, in teaching theory. There's all kinds of theories, Marxist theories and other theories of education that support these beliefs. And so by the time they reach your child's classroom, some of these younger teachers, especially with no life experience, no understanding of what it's like to be a parent, no real understanding of child development, are committed to the proposition that there are certain children who are trans, and it is the role of the teacher to protect them and to facilitate them and to keep them safe from their families. And that's the reason why the Department of Education has had to keep sending these Dear Colleague letters reminding schools that parents are the primary educators of their children, that they are not to hide gender identities, that they're not to allow boys access to girls' bathrooms, in particular, and on and on. It's the reason why even, a counselor like Kaylee Childs just mentioning Christian beliefs was enough to spark the state of Colorado to enact conversion therapy laws banning the expression of Christian beliefs.
But thanks be to God, she won her case. That was another big victory, for reality and for common sense. So I think there is some hope. But the amazing thing is when you're dealing with people who are so sold out to their ideology, it's very hard to show them reality. They do not want to look at reality. It's not reality to them. And that's what's so frightening, that you can't break through that mentality. And let's say, for example, and you know this as a mom, right? If a child has a problem at school, if there's something wrong, if they have lice or if they have an ear infection or if they're complaining about something, the first thing the school does is call the parent. And yet, in this and that's something minor, right? A minor medical condition, they would get the parent involved, right? And yet this is something so serious, and yet they keep it from the parents.
Yes. But again, this comes back to this idea that we're dealing with a new type of child, and that the old norms surrounding marriage and family, right, especially parents, are repressive and harmful and damaging to children. And that really, Theresa, what you're looking at is you are looking at a rival, what we would call in philosophy, an anthropology, a way of viewing the human person that is absolutely opposed to Christianity, right? And so,
reality, though, not just Christianity, but reality.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. And anyone who buys into that anthropology is embracing an anthropology that believes that children have this innate secret knowledge of some mythical gender identity that has nothing to do with their bodies, that they know only by turning inward and consulting their own ideas about stereotypical aspects of being the opposite sex. And it's the duty of the teacher to affirm that and to facilitate the transition. And with that in mind, that is the core belief that's animating them, and it's completely opposed to Christianity, to the point where a Christian parent becomes a threat in the public school, right? One of the things that's been remarkable about some of these cases involving parents is that time and again, when parents in the public school object to LGBT content served up to their children, they are told, hey, if you don't like it, homeschool or send your kids to a religious school. Now, I'm like the biggest fan of religious schools. I would love to see all Catholic children in Catholic schools.
Right.
But the public school system has no business essentially saying to Christian parents, if you're serious about your faith, you cannot have your children in our school system. We will exclude you because we're teaching something antithetical to your beliefs.
Everything is projection. They're doing exactly what they're accusing us of.
Yes. But that's always true.
Well, I know. I'm just pointing it out because it just drives me crazy. Okay, here's a question for you from a language standpoint, a media standpoint, and this is what drives me nuts as a person with a journalism degree and with a media background. I'm constantly telling my listeners that language is extremely important. For example, when the Supreme Court story broke last month, and you see all these different secular stories coming out about the decision that the Supreme Court said that states can ban men from competing in women's sports. They were upholding the bans. That was a decision that came out, the short of it. Obviously, you can check it out for more information. But the way the media are positioning this, for example, I came across so many stories in some pretty mainstream outlets. You could call them mainstream. They're so far left, they're far gone. But using language when talking about plaintiffs, saying the plaintiff in the case was assigned at birth as a male. What? Yeah. The journalists are using that language. Assigned at birth. Mm-hmm. I know that's been used for a while, but I'm looking at this, and as someone who's trained with a journalism degree, this is total agenda-driven language. And this is in the AP style book, by the way, Theresa.
Right. Oh, it's everywhere. I mean, the headlines immediately in the wave of and this Supreme Court decision, this is the Little v. Hecox case, upholding Idaho's law saying that sports can be restricted on the basis of sex, right? Biological sex, which we shouldn't even have to say biological sex because sex is sex, right? It's always biological. But in the wake of that decision, the headlines read, Supreme Court rules that trans girls can't compete in girls' sports. In other words, they're trying to use language to carve out boys who want to be girls as an exceptional kind of girl, right? Mm-hmm. Because then they can create the impression in their readers' minds that this is a form of discrimination, right, where most girls can compete in girls' sports, but these special ones, trans girls, can't. And good for the Supreme Court because they really resisted the language in this one. And that's a welcome change from Scarametti, because in Scarametti, even you could see aspects of some of the language of transgender ideology every now and then, sort of appearing in their decision, even though their decision was very good. But with this latest ruling, Justice Kavanaugh was very, very careful to just stick with biology. And I'll tell you what, I was so grateful for that because we need more of that. We need this kind of clarity. Parents need that kind of clarity because language absolutely is being weaponized.
So what should we do? Because obviously big victory at the Supreme Court. There have been other victories as well, and I know we've talked about this before. We cannot sit on our laurels because they're not resting at all. They're just going to ignore it. If you get it to the Supreme Court, I mean, what else do you do at that point? Because that's the highest court in the land. What do we have to do now? And is it going to trickle down? What kind of a precedent will this set, do you think?
Yeah, so I have a couple of concerns. One of my concerns is that if we, it is actually, I hate to make it about politics, but my concern is that if the next administration comes in is a radical administration, they are going to attempt to undo a lot of the Trump executive orders.
Absolutely. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So the first thing we need to do is keep pressing Congress to enact laws, right? We can't turn this around merely by executive orders. We need to have robust laws that affirm parental rights and that, follow along with the Supreme Court decision. You've got your judicial backing that affirm parental rights and that reinforce the idea that boys are boys and girls are girls, and schools need to recognize sex and not buy into this mythical gender identity. The other thing we need to do is parents need to know their rights, and they need to understand that we have this body of case law now coming down from the Supreme Court that has at every step of the way affirmed parental rights. They need to know that the Department of Education is on their side, and they need to be unafraid to report schools that are in violation to the Department of Education. So, for example, I'm in Pittsburgh. The city of Pittsburgh still has its gender identity policy on the books, and they removed some of the language talking about hiding identity from the parents. But if you keep reading down through the policy, you will find areas where they talk about a child's right to keep their identity secret, even from trusted loved ones, right? Mm-hmm. That's the kind of thing we as parents need to be reporting to the Department of Education so that they in turn can send the letter and say, hey, your funding is at risk if you're not following the law of the land, right? The parents need to know their right. There are organizations out there like America First, like Alliance Defending Freedom, like the Beckett Fund, Catholic organization, the Thomas More Society, that will take your case against these school districts, because now these cases
Theresa, we're almost out of time. I do want to wrap up and give your website again, which is fantastic, personandidentity.com, personandidentity.com. Our guest has been Dr. Theresa Farnan. We'll be right back. Hope you've enjoyed our program on a Monday, July 20th, and learned something from our fabulous guests. And don't forget Dan Burke from the Avila Institute offering a beautiful conference, which is coming up the 23rd through the 25th. And as we mentioned in the first hour of the program, another great conference, which is going to be actually both in person and online. But I think it would be fun to be there, especially if you have plans to attend the beatification of Fulton Sheen, which is coming up in September in St. Louis. You can check out the Saints Conference, America's Saint Conference, which is going to be phenomenal. It's taking place, again, as I said, in St. Louis. Coming up on a Tuesday morning, of course, in this hour of the program, it will be Newman Guide News with Kelly Solomon. She always does such a great job of bringing us up to date on different things happening in education, including this issue of transgenderism, which is running rapid at so many levels, whether it's grade school, high school, higher education, college, whatever. Kelly knows all about it, and she gives us many stories having to do with this issue. So she joins us on Tuesdays, and she'll be with us. And she's joining us now in the National Hour, which is really cool. She's been doing such a good job with this segment. We've been discussing it the last couple of months to see if it would be possible if we can move her to hour number 2. And so we start that tomorrow, which will be July 21st. And then we'll have Sean Corcoran in studio with us, who's going to be on set to do some interviews at EWTN, and we are going to be talking about men of life and how they affect men impacted by abortion. Such an important topic. Ciao, ciao, and God willing, talk to you stateside tomorrow on a Tuesday.